something happened inside Montecito, something the royal family desperately didn't want the public to know. In the dead of night, behind the gates of Harry and Meghan's sprawling California estate, an emergency unfolded that left insiders shaken, and the palace scrambling to contain the fallout before the headlines exploded. But they were too late. By the time whispers began to leak, the story had already ignited across royal circles, tabloids, and digital newsfeeds. And if what's being alleged is even half true, then this wasn't just a health scare, it was a full-blown crisis. One that raises disturbing questions not just about Prince Harry's well-being, but about who in his life may have known exactly what was happening and chose to do nothing. We're talking about reports of unconsciousness, a possible connection to long-rumored substance use. Meghan Markle allegedly seen at a luxury members-only club that same night, smiling with her inner circle while chaos unfolded at home. And yet, the palace remained silent. No statement, no confirmation, just an eerie calm from an institution that's no stranger to burying the truth. But this time, something is different. Sources close to the situation are breaking ranks, and the disturbing truth they're revealing about Harry's downward spiral is casting a long shadow not just over Montecito, but over Buckingham Palace itself. Because if the whispers are real, we're not just looking at a prince in distress. We're watching a slow-motion unraveling. Decades in the making, and no one's coming to stop it. It started with silence, the kind of silence that only makes the whispers louder. According to multiple unconfirmed but persistent reports, Prince Harry was discovered completely unconscious inside his California home in the early hours of the morning. But this wasn't some minor fainting episode. This wasn't a stumble or a dizzy spell. The word being used behind closed doors is collapse. And while palace spokespeople refused to comment, the story that began leaking from Montecito was nothing short of chilling. What made the situation even more alarming wasn't just the state Harry was found in, but who wasn't there. Meghan Markle, his wife and closest confidant, was reportedly nowhere to be found during the ordeal. Instead, she was allegedly seen hours later at an ultra-exclusive private club in Los Angeles, laughing and chatting with friends as though nothing had happened. No hospital visit, no statement, no concern, at least not publicly. Sources suggest Harry was unresponsive for a period of time before help was even called. And when emergency services did arrive, it was clear that this wasn't a minor issue. Insiders claim he was taken to a nearby hospital under urgent conditions and kept in recovery for hours before doctors felt comfortable releasing him. And yet, despite the severity, not a single official word came from the Sussex camp. Nothing from the palace, nothing from Meghan, just a wave of confusion and growing concern from those who've been quietly watching Harry's behavior spiral for years. But it's not just what happened that night that has people on edge, it's what it reveals. Because this kind of incident doesn't just come out of nowhere. For those close to Harry, it was a terrifying confirmation of fears they've long kept under wraps. And for those who've tried to speak up in the past, it was a grim, "I told you so," they never wanted to say. And the real twist? This emergency may have only come to light because of one man. A man whose loyalty to Harry may be the only reason he's still alive. The man who found Harry lying unconscious wasn't just some assistant or house staffer. According to insiders, it was none other than David Langdown, a decorated former Scotland Yard officer who has been by Harry's side for over 2 decades. This is a man who once stood guard outside Buckingham Palace, who protected dignitaries, who earned a royal commendation from Queen Elizabeth herself. And on that night in Montecito, he wasn't just a bodyguard, he was Harry's lifeline. Langdown has been a quiet presence in Harry's chaotic journey, from wild nights in Vegas to royal tours under a blazing spotlight. He's been there through scandals, heartbreak, family feuds, and public takedowns. If anyone understands the full picture of what Harry's endured behind the scenes, it's Langdown, which is exactly why his reaction spoke volumes. According to sources, the moment he found Harry, he didn't hesitate. He made the emergency call, he stayed by Harry's side, and he took control of a situation that could have easily ended very differently. The fact that Langdown was even in close enough proximity to intervene so quickly is telling. Insiders say he's remained on a loose form of private duty, despite Harry's post-royal life distancing him from formal protection. Some say that Langdown, though semi-retired, has continued to check in regularly, out of loyalty, not obligation. And it's a good thing he did, because on that night, no one else was there. Sources familiar with elite protection circles say that Langdown's immediate response may have saved Harry's life. But even he couldn't ignore the deeper implications of what he walked into. This wasn't the aftermath of a bad decision. It looked like the result of something that had been building for a long time. Signs ignored, warnings brushed aside, and when Langdown made that call for help, he may have known this time. It couldn't be hidden. But this wasn't the first time Prince Harry's life has teetered on the edge. In fact, it's just the latest chapter in a long, troubled story, one that's been carefully managed, edited, and buried for years. Prince Harry's name has been tied to whispers and rumors for most of his life, but while the media has often painted his rebellious moments as harmless stunts or teenage drama, the reality behind the palace gates was far darker and far more dangerous. Long before Meghan Markle entered the picture, those close to the crown were already worried about Harry's unpredictable behavior. As early as the 2000s, insiders began to speak quietly about Harry's experiments with marijuana and alcohol. But it didn't stop there. Reports claim things escalated quickly, from party drugs to harder substances, blackouts, violent outbursts, and emotional breakdowns. Royal aides were reportedly caught between fear and frustration. And in an effort to contain the situation, Prince Charles, rather than seeking real help, allegedly approved a shocking solution, building a private nightclub inside the family estate at Highgrove. Yes, a full-blown club designed not for fun, but for control. The logic? If Harry couldn't be stopped from partying, they might as well keep it inside where the cameras couldn't follow. But some behaviors couldn't be hidden behind royal walls. In 2007, reports resurfaced of a wild night that ended with something almost too bizarre to believe. Harry allegedly snorted vodka through his nose. Not drank, snorted. Medical professionals later weighed in, saying this method sends alcohol straight to the brain, bypassing the liver entirely, and could cause fatal consequences in seconds. And yet, barely a whisper made it into mainstream headlines. Why? Because the one outlet brave enough to touch the story, News of the World, was soon shut down under an entirely different scandal. The rest of the media fell silent, and that silence wasn't accidental. It was carefully orchestrated. Every time Harry made headlines for questionable behavior, the palace PR team would move at lightning speed. One week, he'd be caught in a scandal. By the next, he was photographed visiting veterans or shaking hands at charity events. The narrative was always redirected, the image repaired. But the truth? It stayed buried. Until now. Because what happened in Montecito may have finally ripped the lid off a pattern too dangerous to ignore. And the question now isn't just about Harry's choices. It's about how many people saw the red flags and looked away. And at the center of those accusations is a woman the palace once welcomed with open arms, but who some now say may have made everything worse. As speculation swirled around Harry's collapse, one detail ignited an entirely separate firestorm: Meghan Markle's absence. According to multiple sources, while emergency responders were rushing to Harry's aid, Meghan was allegedly at an exclusive members-only club in West Hollywood, laughing, posing for photos, and surrounded by her closest friends. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was chilling, because if reports are to be believed, Meghan didn't just leave Harry alone, she left him in a critical state and made sure to be seen somewhere else. Insiders close to the couple say this wasn't an impulsive getaway. They believe it was calculated, designed to give her an airtight alibi. In fact, the word being used by those within royal-adjacent circles is optics. Meghan, they say, has long understood the power of public image, and when the situation with Harry took a dark turn, she didn't panic. She pivoted. She allegedly positioned herself in a place where no one could accuse her of being directly involved, even as her husband was being rushed to a hospital in serious condition. But what's more disturbing is that this isn't the first time these kinds of rumors have circulated. People close to the Sussexes have quietly whispered for years that Meghan wields enormous control over Harry's personal life. Some claim she manages everything: who he talks to, what interviews he gives, what gets posted, and what stays hidden. And in this latest situation, that control has come under renewed scrutiny. Theories have begun to surface suggesting that Meghan may not just tolerate Harry's alleged substance issues, but could be enabling them. Not out of malice, but for power. One insider described it as a kind of emotional leash. The more dependent Harry becomes, the more tightly she holds the reins. Keep him numb, and you keep him close, One former acquaintance allegedly told a journalist off record. Of course, nothing has been confirmed, but the palace is reportedly watching closely because Meghan's behavior during Harry's most vulnerable moment has raised red flags, not just about her role as a partner, but about what kind of influence she may truly have behind the scenes. And when you dig into Meghan's past, it becomes harder to ignore the signs because the Montecito chaos, it wasn't the first time her name has been linked to controversy involving illicit behavior. Long before she became the Duchess of Sussex, before the palace titles, the Netflix deals, or the multi-million-dollar estates, Meghan Markle was already making headlines in private circles. And some of those stories are only now beginning to resurface. One of the most notorious examples comes from Meghan's first wedding in Jamaica. Guests who attended the sun-soaked destination ceremony have shared stories that, until recently, were dismissed as quirky gossip. But now, they hit differently. According to multiple attendees, guests didn't receive traditional party favors. No candles, no thank you cards. Instead, the rumor is that Meghan personally curated gift bags containing rolled joints, allegedly prepared by hand. Some guests didn't even realize what they were carrying until they returned to the US, which, had they been caught, could have led to serious legal trouble. At the time, the story stayed under the radar. But in light of Harry's recent collapse, people are looking back and asking harder questions. Because this wasn't just a one-time party story, it was part of a pattern. Sources familiar with Meghan's early years in Hollywood say she was never a major partier, but she always knew the right people and how to navigate exclusive scenes with discretion. More than one acquaintance has described her as connected, especially in certain Los Angeles social circles where substance use wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. And according to insiders, Meghan rarely blinked when surrounded by it. Even her mother, Doria Ragland, hasn't been spared from suspicion. While Doria has largely maintained a low public profile, whispers about her past have followed her for years. Some claim she was involved with individuals tied to California's underworld scene in the 90s, though nothing has ever been confirmed. What matters isn't whether every rumor is true, it's that people close to the royal orbit are finally starting to ask, how much of this did the palace know? And more importantly, how much of it did they ignore? The idea that Meghan, and by extension Doria, may have had access to people, places, and substances that the average person wouldn't, has ignited fresh concern about the environment Harry was drawn into. Was he protected, or was he exposed? And when the collapse finally came, did the people closest to him respond like loved ones, or like handlers? And that's what has insiders most disturbed. Because behind every incident, every cover-up, and every spiraling rumor, one truth is becoming harder to ignore. This isn't just about Harry's choices. It's about the system that let him fall. For all the mystery surrounding what happened in Montecito, one fact is becoming clearer by the day. The palace knew. According to multiple sources, Prince Charles, now King Charles, was personally notified the moment Harry was admitted to the hospital. There was no press release, no carefully worded statement. Just a flood of frantic phone calls between London and California that lit up royal communication lines for hours. It wasn't about helping Harry. It was about locking the story down before it exploded. And that's the real pattern here. Not the collapse itself, but the cover-ups that have followed Harry throughout his life. Because this isn't the first time the royal family has gone into silent crisis mode. It's just the first time the silence might not be enough. Behind the palace walls, officials have spent years managing Harry's image like a fragile PR sculpture. Any sign of weakness, rebellion, or scandal was immediately buried under a distraction campaign. A surprise charity appearance, a military photo op, a heartwarming headline about mental health. It was a formula, an art, and it worked, until now. There's even a deeper layer to the manipulation that few dare to speak about. According to a former palace staffer, drug testing protocols during Harry's time in the military were quietly bypassed. Whenever a surprise inspection was announced, Harry was conveniently reassigned or sent off base. In one shocking claim, a source alleges that during his second tour, Harry was involved in a serious incident involving both vodka and a controlled substance, but that files related to the event mysteriously vanished. Even more disturbing, there's an old tabloid clipping that mentions Harry allegedly inhaled an entire canister of medical-grade laughing gas during a hospital visit, the kind of canister usually reserved for supervised use and heavily restricted. Yet, there was no official reprimand, no follow-up, just another vanishing act orchestrated by the royal machine. And it didn't stop with Harry. Every time Meghan came under scrutiny, whether for alleged bullying of staff, leaked emails, or connections to controversial circles, the palace issued the same response. Silence, not a denial, not a defense, just a blank wall of carefully managed indifference. But behind the scenes, staff were panicking, not because they didn't know what was going on, but because they did. But now, the whispers behind closed doors have shifted. And the palace's focus isn't just on protecting Harry anymore. It's about neutralizing a new threat. One they once welcomed, but now quietly fear. Until recently, Meghan Markle was viewed, at least publicly, as the outsider who shook up the monarchy, the disruptor, the modernizer, the symbol of change. But according to insiders, that narrative is quickly unraveling. Because in the wake of Harry's crisis, it's not the prince who's drawing the harshest scrutiny. It's Meghan. Behind palace walls, conversations have reportedly turned from concern to suspicion. Senior officials are said to be re-examining the last 5 years with new eyes, tracing back Meghan's influence over Harry, their separation from royal duties, the breakdown of family relationships, and now, the alleged collapse in Montecito. It's no longer about whether Meghan is difficult. The question now is, was she dangerous? Among the most disturbing theories being floated is the idea that Meghan may have intentionally isolated Harry, not just from his family, but from reality itself. Insiders claim she built a bubble around him, managing what he saw, who he spoke to, and what messages reached him. And within that bubble, she allegedly created a dynamic of total dependence, emotional, mental, and possibly even pharmaceutical. There are now quiet inquiries being made behind the scenes about whether Meghan provided anything to Harry herself. Whether knowingly or not, some believe she created an environment where his alleged use of illicit substances wasn't discouraged. It was overlooked, and in some accounts, even enabled. One theory circulating among former palace aides suggests that Meghan may have leveraged Harry's pain, his childhood trauma, grief, and sense of alienation, as a way to keep him close, manageable, and loyal. And while these claims remain unproven, the shift in tone is unmistakable. Once dismissed as tabloid noise, Meghan's past, her ties, her decisions, her behavior, is now being formally reevaluated. And that includes her mother, Doria. While Doria has largely remained in the background, insiders now suggest she may have had more influence than anyone realized. Her own connections, her silence, her presence in key moments, they're all being looked at again. But what has truly sent shockwaves through royal circles was Meghan's behavior the night of Harry's collapse. Not just that she left, but that she positioned herself to be seen. The word being used over and over again is alibi. Not accident, not panic, not coincidence. An alibi. Because if things spiraled and questions were asked, she needed to be somewhere very public. And very far from Harry. And now, that strategy may backfire. Because the palace doesn't protect those it deems a risk. And if Meghan's absence is interpreted as abandonment, or worse, orchestration, the forgiveness she once enjoyed may disappear for good. But through all the finger-pointing and behind-the-scenes chaos, one figure remains, quiet, steady, and unwavering, the man who may have seen all of this coming. While palace insiders scramble to assess the damage, one man has quietly emerged as the only consistent figure in Prince Harry's increasingly chaotic life, David Langdown. To the public, his name might not mean much, but within royal circles, he's known as the steady presence who's watched Harry grow from a wild teenager into the storm-ridden man we see today. And according to reports, Langdown has seen it all. From the infamous Vegas nights to the fallout with the royal family, from the rushed move to Montecito to the strange media deals, Langdown has been there in the background, watching, protecting, and when necessary, stepping in. While others disappeared, retired, or looked the other way, Langdown stayed. And sources say that wasn't because of a contract. It was because of loyalty. Those who know him describe Langdown as old school, discreet, fiercely protective, and deeply respected within royal security. He doesn't give interviews, he doesn't leak stories. But when he called emergency services during Harry's reported collapse, he shattered the silence that had protected the prince for years. That one action may have saved Harry's life, but it may have also broken open everything the palace had worked so hard to hide. It's said that Langdown has kept meticulous mental records, not files, not reports, but memories, encounters, conversations, warning signs. And if the palace, the media, or the public ever wanted to understand what really happened behind the scenes during Harry's downfall, Langdown is the man who holds the key. Sources say he's been privately urging those around Harry to intervene for years, quietly sounding the alarm, only to be ignored or dismissed. And now, as the crisis plays out in real time, there's a bitter irony. The man who spent decades protecting Harry from physical harm may now be the only one trying to protect him from himself. But even with Langdown's intervention, some believe it's already too late. That what we're seeing now isn't a breaking point, but the inevitable result of years of silence, manipulation, and emotional erosion. And that brings us to the truth no one in the palace wants to admit, because this wasn't just a collapse, it was a reckoning. There's a moment in every carefully controlled narrative when the truth claws its way to the surface, and no amount of silence, spin, or royal PR can bury it again. That moment may have finally arrived for Prince Harry. For decades, he was the spare, the cheeky rebel prince who wore Nazi costumes, crashed parties, and made headlines for all the wrong reasons. But behind the stunts and scandals was something darker. A young man drowning in trauma, pushed into the spotlight before he had time to heal, and shielded from consequences by a machine built to protect the crown at all costs. And when Meghan Markle entered the picture, things didn't get better. They got murkier. Together, they escaped the monarchy. Together, they built a new life in America. But freedom doesn't erase pain. It amplifies it. And with every step further from the institution that raised him, Harry seemed to step deeper into chaos. Now, after a reported collapse that's left the palace rattled and the public stunned, the question isn't just about what happened that night, it's about what it revealed, about who was really there for him, about who might have looked away, and about whether the system that built him up ever really cared what happened when he finally broke. Behind the Netflix specials, the tell-all memoirs, and the staged portraits, there's a broken man, a father, a husband, a son, someone who was never truly given the space to process his grief, his identity, or his trauma. And while it's easy to paint Harry as reckless or out of control, the harder truth is that he may have never had control to begin with. If these reports are true, if Harry really was found unconscious, if Meghan really fled the scene, if palace officials are now turning on their once favored outsider, then this is no longer just a family scandal. It's a tragedy playing out in plain sight, one that even the royal machine can't suppress. And that may be the most terrifying part for them. Because if the walls around Prince Harry continue to crumble, the world won't just see a man who fell. They'll see the people who let him, the enablers, the strategists, the image-obsessed institution that polished him for photos, and then ignored his pain behind the scenes. And if Harry ever chooses to speak, really speak, without filters, NDAs, or staged interviews, it won't just reshape how we see the monarchy. It could destroy it.